Hey guys, so as you can see by the title, I am finally going to be ranking every season of American Horror Story. Now, I was originally going to wait until season 10 aired, but they just announced another, why are my neighbors so loud right now? Quarantine, self-quarantine, right? We're all social distancing right now, everyone's home. Which, by the way, I hope you guys are doing that too, and social distancing and staying at home. I'm gonna be producing more content here, so hopefully that gives you some good things to do while you are in quarantine. Anyway, American Horror Story was renewed for at least 3 more seasons, and I'm not gonna wait that long. And I don't even think realistically I'm gonna be doing YouTube by the time the final season of American Horror Story airs. So, also for the record, I changed this list, rearranged some things probably 20 times before finally like sitting down and filming the finalized list. So will it change in the future? Probably. There are things that won't change, like the worst and the best, but the ones in the middle can kind of fluctuate for me. So this video is also actually a collab with myself and my main channel. So if you want to hear me break down every single serial killer portrayed in American Horror Story, and let me tell you, there are 20 of them, then go watch my main channel video. Also, a lot of you guys always want to hear my general opinions about the seasons, so of course I'll be doing mini reviews for all of these. I'm not just gonna sit here and list them, just so we have a reference point going forward of all of my thoughts on every American Horror Story season thus far, up to season 9. So we're gonna start with the worst and go all the way to the best. So the worst season of American Horror Story, in my opinion, Cult. So Cult takes place in Michigan in the year 2017 after Trump has been elected president. So of course the entire season is very politically charged. And there is a modern day cult run by Kai, who is played by Evan Peters, and a couple portrayals of him as past cult leaders as well, with reenactments, some very graphic reenactments, which if you want to know my thoughts on that, watch the other video. Also, I do want to point out I have done a couple full reviews episode by episode on like 3 of these seasons, I believe, and I will link them down below, the playlists of them, of my reviews for these down below. I did review Cult in its entirety, so if you want to check that out. Usually if I dislike a season of American Horror Story, I at least like the premise and the idea of it. And my fear was that they were going to do an election theme, given the political climate of the time, and then it was called Cult, and I was actually very relieved, although a little still paranoid that they were gonna do an election theme. And then I was obviously let down when it did actually become an election season. And that's the first thing I didn't really like about the season, was the political stuff. I know it can be a horrifying thing, I guess, but for me it's just not horror, and I think that's why I didn't find a lot of this season that scary, because the horror elements were just very weak and exploited and like just kind of lame to me. I do appreciate how they portrayed both sides in somewhat of a negative light. I thought that was more fair, which I liked that kind of social commentary and stuff, and it was an original season. But generally it wasn't scary. I didn't really like the plot. I didn't like the reenactments and the cult thing, and it just wasn't for me. Next worst season is Apocalypse. Apocalypse had so much potential for me, and when they came out with the marketing photos prior to the season and the name of the season being Apocalypse, I was so excited. Again, even if I don't like a season, usually I like the theme. I didn't with Cult, but Apocalypse, that I can get behind. There's so much you can do with it, and apocalyptic and dystopian movies are generally some of my favorites to watch. And then American Horror Story did what it does best. It let me down. This honestly should not have been called Apocalypse, because the apocalypse happened in episode 1 and created a nuclear winter, and then from there on out we didn't see any part of the apocalypse. It was just in the outpost. And then we also got to visit a couple past seasons. I mean, I wanted to see the dystopian nature of the apocalypse and like the people fighting to survive. There was like one scene of the outside world and I was like so excited because there were like these weird zombie people, and that got me excited, but then they never kind of went back to that. And then we of course had the apocalypse portrayal in the end as well, but it just wasn't good enough. Also too convoluted with too many characters, too many species of characters, my god. And this whole season was a Coven sequel, which I get it. Coven was probably their most successful season. It is the most hyped season, I want to say. And at this point, by 2018, when Apocalypse was made, I think people were getting a little bit bored and consistently disappointed with American Horror Story. So they decided to bring back elements from their most popular and successful season. And that's my assumption, by the way, not a fact. This was also a Murder House crossover as well. You know, they tied up some loose ends as we returned to Murder House. But again, they were just recycling old storylines. And at this point, it just felt so uncreative. Like, it was named Apocalypse. Come on, you could do it better than that, American Horror Story. So next, on the worst side of things, Hotel. Are you surprised I haven't mentioned 1984 yet? So Hotel takes place at the Hotel Cortez, which is loosely inspired by Hotel Cecil, and Evan Peters plays James March, who is loosely inspired by H.H. Holmes. Again, watch my video for further explanation on the backstory of those things. Hotel was the first season that we did not have Jessica Lange as part of the cast, but we did get Lady Gaga at this point, who then only stuck around for I think one more season and then peaced out. Probably smart on her part. Hotel was the first season I think was a little bit exploitative, went a little too far with some of the horror elements. It's almost like, I said this before in my review of Hotel, that when we watched Freak Show, there wasn't a lot of horror elements in it, and so the creators were like, oh, you want horror? Let's give them some horror. And it was just like so disturbing and just so much to take in. American Horror Story has always kind of had this underlying, sometimes overlying, is that a word? It is now, sexual theme throughout their seasons, and it's never really bothered me as much as it did in Hotel. That was like the first time where it was sexual themes incorporated with bizarre things, and that's just not a good mixture for me. So of course we get all the sex, the drugs, the serial killers portrayed, and I'm not sure if this is just Ryan Murphy's idea of horror, but he really does need to reevaluate and get a little bit more creative. But of course we know he doesn't actually really get more creative, because the next one on this list is the most recent season, 1984. Now I'm sure you're probably surprised that it's ranked 6th out of 9 on my list. Maybe you're not though, because a lot of people did think that I would like this season given it's based on 80s slashers and camping and things like that. But I didn't hate the second half of the show, hated the first half. It dragged on way too long. The second half wasn't that terrible. I have my issues with it, we'll get to it, but I don't think it deserved like last place or second to last by any means. So 1984 of course takes place in the 80s, which they make that very clear. They honestly push it, they shove it way too far down your throat with the neon, the dance aerobics, the music, the big hair. Like, I get it, we're in the 80s, like you don't have to shove it down our throats like that. Also, this season hands down had the worst intro they have ever done. They were just recycling almost stock footage instead of creating their own creative piece of art. Like, Asylum intro is a piece of art. Like, I would play that in my house as an art installation. And I usually look forward to the intros and watch them every time I watch the show because they are so good. In 1984, that's the worst one I've ever seen. Ryan Murphy has said that this season is heavily based on movies such as Friday the 13th. You think? It was basically American Horror Story's take on Friday the 13th. Like, if you told me this season was like Friday the 13th remade into a show, I would believe you. Except wait, they do what they've done in a lot of seasons, including Murder House. They make it so you can't leave the camp, and any death in the show is not to be taken seriously because they can be revived or they just turn into a ghost. I don't understand why he cannot let characters die. Like, that takes away the horror element of dying, right? Of like the deaths in the show. That's not horrifying anymore because they're not dead, they're just ghosts now, or they get revived or something. Why can't he let it go? I just feel like it's such an American Horror Story trope now that he keeps doing in so many seasons, and it's like the deaths in American Horror Story never mean anything. And I don't know if he does this on purpose, so then when someone actually dies for real, it's more jarring. But it's definitely not scary. Obviously, I'm sure you guys want me to talk about the portrayal of Richard Ramirez as a full-on character in 1984, and I talk more about that in the serial killers portrayed in American Horror Story video, so definitely go watch that. I did think it was in poor taste. I didn't like that they gave him a full storyline with a love story and stuff, because he's already one of the most romanticized killers out there. So to give him a love story, a foot fetish, loving Billy Idol, which were all true, like happened in real life, just doesn't sit well with me. I did feel like the second half, it got better. By episode 5, I was so bored, and I don't know why we needed 5 hours worth of content to get through that one night. Because the second half of the season was so much more creative. Why couldn't they just spread that out more? Like the pacing, the timing, and the story just did not really make sense to me. So obviously 1984 is definitely lower on the list, but I don't think it's the worst season that they've ever done. Okay, now we're moving on to top 5, and I know by now there are gonna be a lot of you disagreeing with me, especially from here on out. So stick with me. Feel free to leave your favorite seasons down below. Rank your American Horror Story seasons down below. So next up we have Freak Show. So Freak Show follows Elsa Mars's freaks as they struggle to establish a successful show. I will say this was one of the most creative seasons that they did, but definitely not a horror season, right? Like I said, I feel like this season, it was right before Hotel and we were missing the horror elements, so they just decided to put so many horror elements in Hotel that just were a little over the top. Many of the freaks in Freak Show were actually based on real people, although I don't think that they used their talents in the way that is portrayed in the show. Also, of course, we have a few real serial killers that kind of inspired the show, such as Twisty the Clown. Now, of course, I want to talk about Kathy Bates. She is amazing in this. Probably what saved Freak Show for me, if not Jessica Lange. This was the last season that we got Jessica Lange, and I felt like she could feel that it was just going downhill from here. Kathy Bates, though, is one of my favorite actors of all time, so when she entered the show in Coven, I pretty much loved every role that she's played, besides in Apocalypse. Not a fan. I just felt like Freak Show deserved the spot right in the middle, because although it was a creative season, it wasn't very horrifying to me and nothing really stood out to me. Next up, we have Roanoke. So this is a season that I think a lot of people hate, and I actually really liked this season. I don't know if it was just one of those that I had to sit on for a little while and reflect to like it. Maybe in the moment I wasn't as big of a fan. I do think it had to do with the setting and why I like it so much, given that it's like a haunted house. They're like in the middle of nowhere in the woods with like this huge house. I love that. And although it was directly inspired by other things, of course, I feel like the way they put it all together and did the story was pretty original. So Roanoke is of course based on the Lost Colony in North Carolina and follows a documentary crew as they are haunted, stalked by spirits inside and outside the house. Also, this features a lot of found footage, which is one of my favorite styles of horror, clearly. And they also, I feel like, kept this season way more simple. They probably had one too many characters in here, but I do feel like it was more on the simple side when it comes to American Horror Story. It wasn't so over the top and fast paced and didn't have a lot of overly sexualized scenes, which I really appreciated. Dare I say that this season is actually tied for third with the next one, and I think that Roanoke did have some decent horror in it, unlike this next one, which takes the third spot, Coven. The beloved Coven. I believe this is a lot of viewers' favorite season, which I understand. I mean, it's in my top 3, of course, but it is missing a primary element of American Horror Story. Horror. Generally, I did think it was much more entertaining than most of the other seasons, which is why it's in my 3rd spot, but obviously it was missing a lot of horror elements, but the storyline was good. I thought it was very creative and original. So this season takes place in New Orleans and follows a coven of witches and their rivalry with the Voodoo Queen. I think this was probably my favorite role that Kathy Bates played in this show. Jessica Lange was amazing. I cry every time. But her best role is yet to come on this list. Now, I might be a little bit biased when it comes to certain elements of Coven because I did grow up listening to Stevie Nicks and Fleetwood Mac, so I really liked those elements in the show. Had nothing to do with horror, but I really enjoyed Lily Rob's character. Also, I want to point out that my top 3/4 on this list are the only ones that I have ever had a desire to rewatch and have rewatched. Actually, I did rewatch Freak Show. So I saw that more than once. So next up on this list is their very first season, Murder House. I feel like this is the season that really defined their voice in horror TV and was completely original when it came out. And although there are flaws in Murder House and probably a few exploited situations, it is the classic season that started it all. And again, if you want to hear my specific issues with it, go watch my other video. Murder House follows a family that moves into a house that is haunted, to say the least, and when you die in the house, you can't leave. Which originally, this was a creative idea, and it made sense in the season of Murder House. Why they continued that trope for way too long, I don't know. Personally, I really appreciated the twists in Murder House and the storytelling throughout. I felt like it was so creative and really well paced, and yeah, the twists were amazing and definitely one of the best American Horror Story seasons, I think, objectively. So of course, this brings us to the very last one on this list, which is my favorite season. No other season even comes close to this season, and that of course is Asylum. It is my most rewatched season. I love rewatching it in the fall and winter. It just has those like rainy day vibes to me. And I'm sure because I am so passionate about mental illness and exploitation of that, a lot of people are gonna argue that this season does in fact do that. However, I don't think it's that exploitative. They do show somewhat accurate depictions of what mental institutions were really like in the middle of the last century, so I don't think that they necessarily exploited mental illness for horror purposes. Was it horrifying? Absolutely. But the more horrifying elements in the show had nothing to do with mental illness. I feel like the characters that they wrote in Asylum are the most complex, deep, well-rounded characters that I have seen in probably any show. And hands down, Jessica Lange's best role. I don't know what it is about Jessica Lange, but in Coven and Asylum, I cry every single time with her towards the end of the season, obviously. And Sister Jude is by far my favorite character that has ever been portrayed in American Horror Story. Now, this isn't a perfect season by any means. Maybe they had one too many storylines and many people based in reality, so was it all that creative? I mean, they did creative things with the original stories of who these people are based on, of course, and like the real situation of mental institutions. But regardless, I do hope they bring back this specific type of horror that they did in this show, because it is just missing in a lot of the seasons. But it's been 7 years, so I'm not sure why I'm still holding out hope. I think American Horror Story is best at creating hype around seasons and making things sound really cool and appealing and horrifying, but then they fail to deliver in the execution. And personally, my patience is wearing quite thin. I mean, the last good season, in my opinion, that I would rewatch was Roanoke. And even then we had Freak Show prior to that, which wasn't great. And the reason why, I don't know why I do this every year. Every year I'm like, this season will be so much better. I'm so excited. This is the one, right? Every single time since Roanoke. And I'm disappointed every time. But I think I do this and make this assumption for two reasons. One, I know that they're capable of making a genuinely good, scary horror show. They've done it before. I know they have it in them. And two, they're so good at building the hype with their promos and their ideas. The ideas are always so creative, but then they don't do as much with them as I want them to. But the next season, I do have a little bit of hope. See, this is me doing it again. Every year I'm like, this season will be better, but this time it might be, because they have Kathy Bates coming back for one, and they have Macaulay Culkin added to the cast, which honestly I love him, and I'm very excited to see who he plays in this kind of season. Also, it seems to be based around water, which is really cool. It could be like a Loch Ness Monster situation, or a Cthulhu even would be really awesome. I don't know if they have the budget for stuff like that, but that would be creative. It could be like deep sea stuff. They haven't done ocean stuff really yet. I'm still waiting on a space season though. I'm not sure how creative they're gonna make it, regardless of what the theme actually is. We shall see. And I think what I'll do for this next season is I will review it at the end and just do a general overview of the show as a whole. So that is my ranking from worst to best for American Horror Story seasons, the 9 that we have thus far anyway. Please list your ranking of the seasons down below in the comments, and make sure you check out my other video if you want a more breakdown of the seasons and the killers portrayed in them. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.